There we go. Right. So thank you so much for joining me. My name's Kate. If you don't know me already, I think there's some people who've already been on workshops, but might have some newbies as well. So yeah, very, very excited to be here to take you through this lovely workshop. I love making Roman blinds. They're so satisfying, and just kind of having something that feels a bit sort of mechanical that you've made. It's a very, very rewarding make. They're also brilliant because they don't take up very much fabric. So whereas with curtains, you need loads of fabric, you don't need very much fabric with Roman blinds. So it's a really great way of making a lovely window covering without having to invest tons and tons of money in fabric. So that's really good. And they're really not that hard to make as well. It's mostly kind of all the measuring. You've got to be really precise and careful with your measuring and your cutting. And then there's not actually that much sewing involved. It's brilliant. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through making a blind. I'm going to make like a small one today. But I'm going to make it, what my preference is that you sit back and you watch and you take notes if you want to, and you ask any questions that you'd like to ask whilst I'm here. And then I will send you the recording. And I also have a really thorough handout, kind of handbook that I've made you as well. So I'll send you the recording along with the handbook, and then you can watch it and make at your leisure. It's not something that you really want to rush through making. You want to kind of just make, if you measure wrong and cut wrong, then you're like really be annoyed with yourself. So if you sit back and watch this evening, and then you can make it in your own time. Oh, audio missing. Is the audio okay for everybody else? Yes. Joe?
Yeah, I can hear it.
Joe, I think it's okay for everyone else. I'll write it in the chat. There we go. Sorry. Right. Okay. So let's get cracking. What I'm going to do first is tell you everything that you need, and then the first bit is kind of talking about the measuring up. Please do pop anything else in the chat though if you have any questions, or you can unmute yourself and ask me in person as well if you'd like to. Okay, so obviously you need your fabric and you need your lining fabric. I'll talk a little bit more about fabrics in a moment. Then you also obviously need your sewing machine. A tape measure is indispensable, but actually for Roman blinds and anything where you need really large pieces of fabric and you need to be quite precise with your measuring, I recommend not using a tape measure like that, but actually I've left mine indoors, but using like a retractable steel rule, like one that you use for building projects and things like that. And that is because it's always a nice dead straight line. And with a tape measure and large pieces of fabric, the tape measure could sometimes be a little bit, not completely straight line and get a little bit kind of crumpled up. But with a nice steel rule like that, it's brilliant. It just makes measuring, you don't need someone to hold the other end as well. You can just kind of put it out like that. So they are really, really good for making Roman blinds and curtains. I would highly recommend that. Your dressmaking scissors, or if you're comfortable using a rotary cutter and a ruler, they're quite handy for things like this. You might want that. Pins, obviously you need pins. You also need something to mark your fabric with, so a fabric pen or tailor's chalk. You need a long ruler, so you could use your steel rule or just use something else which is long and a straight line if you don't have like a quilting ruler like that. And then you need all of your bits and bobs to actually make the blind. So one of the things, which is a brilliant invention, is Roman blind tape, which looks like this. You might not be able to see on here, but it's got it's kind of got tubing down the middle, and it's got little loops on it that you thread the cord through. You also need your cord, looks like this. I always use synthetic cord, so like nylon or polyester cord. And that is because it just flows through much more smoothly. It's a bit stronger, kind of, you know, a bit more robust. If it's going to get ever kind of damp or anything behind the curtains or behind the blind against the window, I just prefer it to cotton cord. Then you also need some Velcro, like that. And then you need your rods to go through your blind. You can get Roman blind kits, or you can kind of make up a bit of a kit yourself. So I'm going to show you both ways, and I've put in your handout exactly what you need if you're buying each one. But if you were to buy a kit, you'll get like a rod for the bottom and then thinner rods to go into your blind, which look like this. If you're making it up yourself, you can just get doweling from a hardware store like Homebase or B&Q or whatever. And then you need either for the top, you either need a piece of like 2x3 wooden batten, or if you're using a kit, you'll get like a header rail batten thing like that. And then you need there's a few other little bits of hardware like the cleat to tie your thingy onto the wall. Oh, and some eye screws as well for the batten. Otherwise, so that's everything that you need. So I've put all of that into the handout at the very beginning, so you don't need to remember all of that. That's just kind of a few hints and tips. You also need an iron. It's indispensable as this, and an ironing board as well. Okay, so the first thing you need to do when you're measuring up for your blind is decide whether you want the blind to go inside a recess or outside on a wall. So if you've got like a window, in a recess of a window, you might want a blind to go within that. It's quite nice because it takes up less space. It can also mean that there's less light let into the room because you're really kind of up against the window and there's wall coming either side of it. So that is a really nice way to do it if you'd like to, but it also looks lovely if you want to have it on the outside of the wall, you know, with the kind of the window in between. And actually that can let more light in because you can have your blind slightly higher up, so you have the full windows size to let light into a room. And also when it's down, a blind which is on a wall, it can make the wall look slightly larger because you can have kind of a larger blind in front of the window. When you're measuring, if you're in a recess, you need to measure the height and the width in at least 3 different places, and then take the shortest of those distances. That's because quite often, especially if you're in an older property, they won't be exactly square, and so you need to take the shortest distance to make sure, because if it's too long, you won't be able to fit it in if it's widthways, and if it's too long, it will kind of sag on the bottom. So you take 3 measurements for the length and 3 for the width, and use the shortest one. You also need to just bear in mind, make sure that the depth of that recess is deep enough to put so this is like the depth of a kit. You need to make sure that it's at least deep enough to put that into it. You can attach these to the ceiling or to the wall, so you can bear that in mind. You can do either of those. Then yes, so for the length, take the shortest distance, that's your length of your blind, and then for the width, take the shortest width and then deduct another 2 centimeters. Oh, sorry, we've just got some more people. Deduct another 2 centimeters so that when your blind goes up and down within the recess, it will flow smoothly and it won't get caught on anything. Just also bear in mind anything else that might be that you might have tiles on the inside of the recess, you might have a window handle or something like that. So you need to be a bit mindful of anything else like that might get in the way. If you are putting your blind on the wall, so it's in front of the window, you can be a bit more, you can play around a little bit more with the measurements, and it's kind of up to you really. I would always say along the top, you need at least 5 centimeters above the top of that window recess on the wall, so that you've got space to put the header rail onto the wall. Down the sides, I would say, actually, no, I'd say well, 5 to 7 centimeters at the top, actually, maybe about 7 centimeters. I think I put 7 in the handout. Down each side, I would certainly allow 5 centimeters down each side extra for your blind. So your blind is at least 10 centimeters wider than the window on your wall. And that is just so that it's covering up, it just looks a bit neater. And also once it lets less light in as well. So if it's a really slim, tiny bit extra, it'll let quite a lot of light in. So you want at least 5 centimeters really. And then along the bottom, it's completely up to you. So think about how long you might, if there's a window ledge that you, or a radiator or anything else, which is kind of in the way that you want to have. So think about just the line of where you want the bottom of the blind to be. But that gives you a rough idea of how to measure the size of your finished blind. And that's the very first thing that you need to do, and the first thing that you need to know. And then what I do when I make blinds, I literally, so you'll see on the handout, I've made you like a little bits to write in the dimensions for everything, but I literally kind of draw a rectangle. Okay, get it clear in my brain. My blind is going to be this width and this length. So you kind of, it's just really clear to you, because there are a few different measurements that you need to remember. And I'm sure I have done many times, and I'm sure other people, hopefully not you, have sometimes looked at the wrong measurement, cut it wrong, and been really annoyed with myself just for, not doing it absolutely right. Okay, so that's how you measure up for the actual size of your blind. In terms of fabric, I would avoid anything that's kind of slippery. I'd avoid anything that's too thin, anything which is knitted, certainly. What you want to try and go for is something that's it really either cotton or linen, because it just has a little bit more, it behaves better. It kind of, the structure of the fabric means that it just kind of, it doesn't slip around on itself, and it just sits nice and flat, really. It's just you can get a much neater result, I think, certainly if you're starting out. Try and avoid anything too thick as well at the beginning, because you'll have loads of layers to go through, and it's slightly harder to get a really nice neat finish, because in some places you've got quite a few folds of fabric. If you want to really make your life a bit easier, you can use a woven stripe or check, because then it's just got these lovely lines that you can follow. And because they're woven, you know that they're always going to be nice straight lines. With printed checks or stripes, beware, they're not always completely straight, so you might want to avoid those. But like a gingham, a lovely gingham, oh, it looks so nice. Or like a nice ticking fabric, they just make your life much easier. It's really lovely. I've got a lovely discount for you at my favorite fabric store. I've included that on the handout, and I'll send it in the email later. So okay, you've got your dimensions that you need for your actual blind. So let me actually show you what I've done on the handout so that you can see. Okay. Kat, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that handout? Brill, thank you very much. Okay, so this bit over here is measuring and cutting your fabric. So what you need to do is pop your actual finished desired blind width and length in here, this one and this one. And then there's a little bit of maths to do to work out the size of your main fabric and your lining fabric. I have actually made it a little bit easier even still, and I've made a little spreadsheet. So if I click that link, I will just have to share my screen again so that I'm going to the right thing. You click that link, it takes you to this document here, and you can just type in whatever you want your finished blind size to be. So say you want your finished blind to be 45 centimeters wide, you put 45 in there. Say you want it to be 70 centimeters in length, you type 70 in there, and then it tells you the width and length of your main fabric, and then the width and length of your lining fabric. So if you'd like to, you can use that link on the handout and just type it in there. But if you'd prefer to do the maths yourself, or you're just interested in seeing how you get to that, those sums are here as well. So the main fabric is the width of the blind plus 9 centimeters. And then the length of the main fabric is the length of the finished blind plus 11 centimeters. And then the lining fabric is the blind width minus 3 centimeters. And then the lining fabric is the same length as the blind fabric. So you literally just pop those in there and then you've got those written down to check back against, because it is really, really important that you get those right. Because if you don't, it's just not going to fit. That's the main thing really about with Roman blinds is I always advocate doing this with any sewing project, but it's literally like usually say measure twice, cut once, like measure 4 times with blinds and cut once, because you've usually got really lovely fabric, and the worst thing would be to make it and then hang it and find out it's not quite right. Yeah, so if you do all those sums and then measure your fabric. Where's my other document gone? I just want to make sure I don't miss anything out. Oh, there we go. So I have pre-cut myself a piece of fabric today to make a slightly smaller blind than what I probably would normally, but that's mainly so that I can try and hold it up and show it to you on the screen. So this is the fabric I've got for the outer, which I've cut to size, and then this is the fabric that I've got for the lining. So if you remember, the lining and the outer fabric are the same length, but the main fabric, so they're both the same length. You can see here, well, they should be. Let's double check now. I've done it wrong. Oh yeah, lovely. They're the same length. Oh, I didn't talk about fabric for the lining fabric. So you can just use regular like curtain lining. This is, I think, sheeting. Like I think this is a pre-washed linen actually that I bought. You can even use like calico if you'd like to, but make sure you definitely pre-wash it first, because there can be a lot of shrinkage with calico. So if you ever do need to wash your Roman blinds, you want to make sure that that's pre-washed first. But this was actually purchased as pre-washed linen, so I know that that's not going to shrink at all. So but regular curtain lining is absolutely fine. This fabric, do you mean the gold one? This is so lovely, isn't it? I do love it. I know.
Yes.
This is
yes,
this is
beautiful.
I used to stock this fabric in my shop, and I kept some, and I just love it. So I don't know why I'm making it into a blind, really. That seems a bit waste. Anyway, it's lovely. I've still got some more. But they do have some other lovely fabrics in that other shop. Really wide choice as well. Okay, so they're the same length, these two, but if you remember width-wise, the fabric is 9 centimeters wider than the window, and the lining is 3 centimeters narrower. So there's quite a big difference in the widths of these two fabrics, which might feel a bit strange, and it's certainly going to feel strange when we do the first sewing step, but just bear with me, because I promise you it will all, you'll be like, oh, actually that's great, of course that's why you did that. Right, so first job that you need to do is fold your fabric in half, widthways, lengthways. So this is the length here, so this is the top edge, the top of my fabric along the top. I'm going to fold it in half, and then I'm going to take my scissors and do just a little snip like that at the center point, no more than 1 centimeter deep. It can be less than 1 centimeter. And then do exactly the same with your lining fabric. So fold it in half, lengthways again. So this is the top here, and do a little V there as well. And again, I'm not going to tell you why I've done that just yet, because it will be much easier if you just watch, and it will become clear in a moment. Okay, so once you've done that, you can open your fabrics up and then lie them on top of each other with right sides facing. And what you want to do is sew down the 2 side edges. So I've made sure that this is the top on both of them, so you can see the 2 V's are both at the top, and then because they're the same length, they should line up really beautifully down that long edge. So pop those together. I'm going to pin and stitch that. Quickly do that now. I'm going to not probably take quite as much care as I normally would, because I just want to make sure that I show you all of the techniques, and it doesn't matter if it's not my finest work. So that's pinned down one side, and then we're going to pin exactly the same down the other side. And because the main fabric is so much wider, it kind of billows down like that. So it's kind of, it's not even, which, like I say, does feel slightly alien. I remember when I used to teach this workshop really regularly in person, people would be like, what is she thinking? Like, this is not going to line up. And then you do it, and it's like, oh yeah, oh, that's really good. Okay, so that's pinned, and then we're going to sew with a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. And it's important that you do 1.5 centimeters, because all the measurements that we have worked out are based on that being our seam allowance. So, sewing machine at the ready. I might try and change cameras and show you. Do you know what, actually, I'm not going to change cameras, because the other day when I used my other camera and then I went back to this one, the audio did go really weird and I couldn't get it back again, and I don't want that to happen. So literally what I'm doing is I'm stitching down these two long edges through both layers to stitch them together with that 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. Oops, so let me just do that now. There we go. Stop. Right, feel free to ask questions whilst I'm doing this, if you have any. What's going on? No. Try that one. Hang on, hold the line, callers. I'm just going to change the pedal on my sewing machine. I've been using it all afternoon, but obviously when you do something live, this happens. Right, come on.
Hi, Kate.
Okay. Yeah.
What stitch length do you recommend using when you're sewing this blind?
So I'm on 2.5, which is great, standard. I kind of stick to that usually. If you've got really bulky fabric, you might need to make it very slightly longer, but I would say 2.5 should be absolutely fine. For these two hems that you're doing now, you can reverse at the beginning at the end to secure your stitching. The reason I say that is because there are a couple of instances on a Roman blind project where actually I think it's better not to do reversing to secure your stitching, and I'll show you the other method. But for these two hems, reversing is absolutely fine, because these are going to get kind of encased in the top and the bottom of your blind. Oh golly, I'm not slap bang on my 1.5 centimeters, but you all will be. I'm just hurrying through to get it done. Right, okay. There we go. So once you've done that, you can turn your fabric out the right way. And I love this little reveal. It's really, really satisfying. So you turn it out the right way, And then if you remember, we had those V's at the top of the blind. So what we can do now is line up those two V's, and it makes it really easy for you to see exactly where, so to make sure that it's even on both sides. So if you can see, this is now going to be the back of your blind. So it's lovely and satisfyingly neat because you've got those really nice clean edges with your fabric kind of wrapping around to the back. And then on the front, it's just a lovely flat panel of your fabric. So what you want to do is this can take a little bit of doing. With a larger blind, it's definitely a little bit harder, so definitely take your time over it. Make sure that your fabric is pressed beforehand, unlike mine, you probably just noticed. I usually use the floor, unless you've got a really nice big dining table that you can fit all of the fabric on. I usually clear a lovely clean space on the floor and lay my fabric out to make sure it's perfectly flat, because you don't want any wrinkles or ruches at this point. This is the point at which to remove any of those. So you lay your fabric out flat, pull it so that it's both the front and the lining and the back fabric are kind of pulled reasonably taut so that they're kind of even, and then you'll see the amount that you've got on either side, and you want to continue that all the way down the side. So I normally put pins in at this point to make sure that we're holding it in place, and then you'll see within there those seam allowance pieces, those seam allowances there. You want to, so what we're going to do next is press these two side hems, and we want to make sure that those seam allowances are not towards the edge, but they're towards the center of the blind. And that is because, generally speaking, it's just going to be neater. Generally speaking, your outer fabric, your main fabric, is going to be thicker than your lining fabric, and so you want to minimize the bulk where possible. So you don't want, if you've got a thicker main fabric and that's folding back on itself again, that just is increasing the bulk, whereas this way it means it's going to be as smooth as it possibly can. So you want to continue this all the way down to the bottom. Because this is quite a nice small blind, I can quite easily kind of pull it taut like this, but if you're working on a larger blind, it will take you a little bit longer and it will probably be a bit neater as well. But you definitely get the idea. So I'm just going to pop a couple more pins down, and I've actually turned on my mini iron so I can give it a bit of a press, because it makes a massive difference really in all sewing projects, if I'm completely honest. If you press as you go, it's really, really hard to get a lovely professional, nice neat press after you've constructed something. But if you press as you go, you can imagine trying to kind of get your iron into any nooks and crannies once something's been sewn is really tricky. But if you do it step by step as you do each seam, then you can get into each seam and make sure that it's nice and neat. Okay, one more pin here, and then I'm going to give it a little mini press. I always use glass-headed pins, because then it means you can use your iron and not have any concerns about melting the heads of the pins. And I've got I hate ironing normally. I don't really iron much unless I'm sewing, and I've got my lovely little mini Cricut. Look at it, it's so cute. And it's really, really handy for just having out when you're doing sewing projects. Press like little seams like this. It gets really hot. It's absolutely brilliant. So I've got my heat mat here. Just going to get my little press and press all the way along. I can just go over those pins, that'll be fine. And then it means that you've got a nice crisp outer edge of your blind, and everything's just going to sit much more flat once it's constructed. That's one side done, very roughly. Yours will be neater. And then just make sure that seam allowance is sitting flat. There we go. And the other side as well. There we are. Oh gosh, I love this, honestly. It's so, like, it just makes ironing a bit more fun. It does with a big iron. I love it. And it's great for little fiddly sewing projects as well, you know, rather than trying to get the big iron into that. Right, let's turn it off. There we go. Okay, can take those pins out now. But as you can see, I mean, already, to be honest with you, it's kind of starting to look a bit like a Roman blind. Like I say, there's not loads and loads of sewing to do, but you know, isn't that nice? Oh, look, I should have pressed all of it. I might quickly just go over that nasty big. There we go. Oh, I'm not going to do it. Oh, you get the idea. Okay, right. So that's the front panel. What you need to do next is the bottom hem. So we know which is the bottom because it doesn't have these V's in the top. So I'm going to turn it around, but I'm going to keep my iron handy actually because I'm going to use it again in a mo. So this is the bottom, and we want to turn the bottom. Oh, just going to give it a quick trim. I obviously didn't measure absolutely perfectly. Hang on a mo. So we want to turn the bottom. The bottom is going to form the casing. This bottom hem is going to form the casing for the bottom rod or the bottom piece of doweling for your blind. So it needs to be quite wide because you can have a larger piece of doweling actually. This is a bit wider. This is about 2 centimeters in width. And that's the side angle of it. But it can be a little bit larger because you want it to be a little bit heavier, actually, if possible, along the bottom, just so that it weighs the blind down nicely. So we want to fold this bottom hem up by 2 centimeters and then 4 centimeters. So what I always do is rather than measuring now, I fold and then I measure the fold because it's much, much easier to do it that way. So I want to measure 2 centimeters, first of all. So I'll measure that fold, that's 2 centimeters, and then fold over again by 4 centimeters. So again, fold over and measure the fold. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. Pop a little pin in there. Because this is really nice and narrow, because it's not a huge blind, I'm just going to measure again here and then pull those nice and taut. If you've got a wider blind, of course, you want to be doing it probably about every 20 centimeters or so, measuring and folding, just to make sure that it's nice and even. So I'll measure my 2 centimeters first of all. Ooh. And then 4 centimeters. There we go. Put another pin in, and then I'll just double check that everything is nice and even. Ooh. There we go. It's falling on the floor. This I need to, you know, you often have them around your neck. You really do need to put it around your neck to make this. Right, that's slap bang on 4. I'm going to pop a couple more pins in now, just to make sure that it's held all the way along. And then what I would do if I was making them actual ones that I really, rather than a sample, is I would press that now and then stitch. And you need to stitch right close to the top of the fold along here. And what that does is it leaves this casing open for you to slot in the batten afterwards. So I'll quickly do that. Whoop. Again, just regular straight stitch is fine. And actually, so at this point, you can, I would say, don't do reversing. So I'm using a contrasting thread colour today so that you can see my stitching and you can see what I'm doing. But obviously you would use a coordinating thread colour. Usually it will probably be your habit to do a little bit of reverse at the beginning and at the end of each stitch line. But because the stitching for all of this stitch line is going to be visible hopefully not too visible because you're using a coordinating thread, but it might be visible on the front of your blind. So instead of doing reverse at the beginning, at the end, pull nice long tails of thread out from your machine, and then do your stitch line, and then pull nice long tails of thread out at the end as well. No reverse. Gosh, it's my habit to do it. I very nearly did reverse just straight after telling you not to. Another thing to note actually with blinds and curtains is that, you probably noticed me doing it then, because you're sewing through multiple layers, a bit like when you're doing quilting. So underneath your machine, there's those teeth, the dog feed, which kind of go like this, and they pull your fabric through the machine. You don't have those on the top of your fabric. So sometimes when you're sewing multiple layers, the top and the bottom can very, very slightly slip and slide, so they won't be exactly in line with each other. So when I'm sewing across, certainly with curtains and blinds, I'm a bit more, I kind of try and manipulate the fabric a bit more myself. So if you can see, I'm holding it much more kind of taut than I normally would, to minimize any of that slipping and sliding of the top and bottom layers. Because what you don't want is imagine you've done all your sewing and then you hang up your blind, and then maybe one of your or two of your lines going across kind of very, very slightly move the fabric. It's never going to lay completely flat as a flat panel. So it's just quite a good habit to get into, to sew like this. So you're pulling it a little bit more taut than you ordinarily would, to minimize any of that slippage. If you have a walking foot for your machine, you can use that. A walking foot is what you generally use for patchwork and quilting, or for quilting. And what that does is, if you have lots of layers of fabric, it kind of it guides the fabric through in a much more steady way to minimize any of that slippage. Right, I'll carry on quickly. Okay, so no reverse at the end. And then let's just make sure we've got nice long tails of thread. And then what I need you to do, instead of the reversing, if you get a pin, so we're on the back of the blind, that first stitch, I'm just going to pull the thread through with a pin. So now both threads, the top and bottom thread, are both here on the reverse of the blind, and then you just simply tie those two threads in like a double or a triple knot, and then that means that your threads are secured, but you don't have any extra bulk or unsightly reversing stitching on the front of your blind. Okay, so you can do that at both ends, but that is our bottom hem of the blind now done. So next thing you need to do is measure and measure, certainly 3 times, just to be really, really sure that you've got it absolutely right, but measure from the bottom of the blind upwards, so that you get, and what you're looking for here, that is the finished. So refer back to that first sheet where you put the finished length of your desired length of your blind in. That's the measurement that you want at this point, because we're going to be folding over the top hem, so it'll be the finished final length, which I think I had measured to be 46 centimeters on this one, but I can't remember for sure. Let's have a little look. So again, you want to lay it out really nice and flat. You want to use your steel rule if you can, and measure from the bottom up, and you want to do it at regular intervals across your blinds to make sure that it's nice and straight. So let's see. Oh no, it wasn't. I think it was 50, let's say 52. So here we go. I'm measuring up. I'm going to, rather than doing a pin, I'm going to get my fabric pen and do a little mark like that with fabric pen on my blind. And I'm going to do that at various intervals all the way across, just to make sure that it's going to be a nice straight line. And then once you've done that, you can get your ruler, if you've got a long ruler, if you want to, and draw a line across. There we go. Obviously, I've only done it once, but you're going to do it 3 times, just to be on the safe side, because this is the point at which you're determining the actual finished length of your blind. So it's really, really important that this is correct. You can trim that once you're really happy that that is definitely the finished height length of your blind. You can trim this, any excess, to about 1 centimetre higher than that. So you're only going to have about 1 centimetre extra. And that is because you want to kind of minimize bulk really when you are making your Roman blinds. You don't want to have loads of extra fabric. And you'll see in a minute, we're going to attach the top of the Velcro to the top in order to attach it to the batten or the kit. And you just don't want, the fewer layers you have, the better. If you've got a really wide blind, it's sometimes there's more. This is another reason why it's a good idea to use something like cotton and linen, because it just kind of grips it to each other much better than it would anything that's slightly more slippery. But you might want to do some tacking stitches, just really large stitches all the way across at various intervals on your blind, just to make sure if you're laying it out that it doesn't slip and slide around. Yeah, you might want to do that. Okay, so I'm going to fold it over at that line that I've marked. I'll just pin it in place. Anticipate a bit of ironing, so I'll just turn my mini iron back on again. I'm folding it over exactly on that line. Oops. You can actually do it on, draw your line on, turn it over and do it the right way around and draw your line on the right side if you're happy to. This is a washable fabric pen, so just if it dabs with water, it would come out. So you'd be fine to do that. And then it means you can be even more precise. It's up to you, whatever you want to do. Right, so just get my mat again, give that another quick press. And then that is the top hem ready. There we go. For the Velcro. So the blind is now kind of how it's going to look. It's our finished panel fabric, which is another thing worth noting actually. So sometimes, you can get fabrics which are almost like pieces of art, really. It's really worth having a think about how you position your panel, because you can almost have it like a piece of, we used to stock some really amazing linens with these beautiful designs on them, and they'd almost be like works of art hanging on your wall. So have a think about, if you do have a pattern, a printed pattern like that, have a think about how you lay it out. Right, so I've pressed the top edge, so I can take the pins out now because I'm happy that it's pressed and it's going to hold its position. If you want to, if your fabric's not too thick, you can just fold in the edges slightly like that, just to eliminate anything poking its head out on the sides. Or if you're happy that it's not going to fray, you can trim the edges like that. The fabric's going to be encased into the Velcro, so it's not going to have any wear and tear on it. So you can do that without really fearing that it's going to fray too much. Okay, we're going to attach a piece of Velcro across the top of the blind, and that is how you fix the top of your blind to the batten or the top of the blind kit. It's really important that you use the fluffy side of the Velcro. That's the side that you attach to your blind. And that's just because with the hooky side, it can get caught on loads of different things. So if you do ever want to wash them, You don't want to certainly wash them with the hooky side because it will pull on the fabric and things. So it's important that it's the fluffy side that you attach to the blind. So you line it up really just in from the very edge of the fabric. I'd say by 1 millimeter, and then the top is also probably about 1 millimeter, maybe nearly 2 millimeters down from the top. So we're pretty close to the side and top edge of the fabric with the Velcro. And then we can pin it all the way across. But again, as you're sewing this on, you might not be able to pin it on even so that it's exactly right. So I always leave a longer tail of Velcro at the other end. It doesn't need to be this long actually, but probably about 5 or 6 centimeters longer. And then that just means when you're actually stitching it on rather than pinning it, so you can see here, it might not be exactly the same length. It means that then when you're stitching it on, if there's any deficits, any difference in what you need for the Velcro, you've got a bit extra there if you need it. Now, what we need to do is sew a line along the top and along the bottom of the Velcro edge onto the fabric. And so for the same reason that I was just describing earlier with that slippage in fabric, you really just need to avoid minimize any risk of having puckers and things on the front of your fabric. So what we're going to do is, again, not do any reversing. So we'll use that long tail knotted technique and do a line of stitching down the top edge of the Velcro, and then take it out of your machine, and then do another line down the bottom edge of the Velcro, but in the same direction, because then you're eliminating the risk of having any kind of slippage and puckering like that might occur on your fabric. It probably won't. These are just ways of really trying to make sure that you keep your front panel of your fabric as smooth as you possibly can. Okay, I'm just going to sew the top one now in the interest of speed, but once I've done that, I'll just show you to confirm that everybody's understood what you do for the bottom one as well. Okay, but underneath, see, yeah. Okay, so we're not going to do any reversing. Okay, we're off. So I can feel that I'm requiring a little bit more of the Velcro than as I had pinned it. It's kind of needs a little bit more. So it's a good job that we added a little bit extra on the end. It's just in case. It also, by having the fluffy side on your blind rather than the hooky side, sewing through that hooky side would be horrible, but sewing through this side is absolutely fine. Okay, and then stop literally just as you get to the end. We're not going to do any reversing. Again, just leave nice long tails, and you can do that knot trick, pulling the thread through to the back, and then you can just trim your Velcro so that it's just 1 millimeter in from the edge on the back of your blind as well, like that. Okay, and then what you would do is start at this end again and do another line of stitching along the bottom of the Velcro to hold that in place. And the fact that we trimmed, you can see now the reason why we trimmed the flap, the hem, the seam allowance means that that's all just concealed really nicely and neatly underneath the Velcro, and you've got no ends or whatever flapping around. It's just much, much neater. Okay, top, done. We're nearly there, guys. It's a little bit more maths to do, but not too much. Okay, so what we need to do now is maths, actually. Let me measure this one and then I can show you for real. I think this was 52. Yeah, so this blind is 52 centimeters in length. Let me show you a finished blind now to demonstrate the next bit. Okay, so here's a finished blind, which I didn't do as a sample one. This one actually fits the door of my office. So it's a bit bigger, but I will endeavour to show you correctly. Okay, so it's pulled all the way up to the top. Oh gosh, it's quite hard to do it back to front. Okay, it's pulled all the way up to the top at the moment. Can you see this length here is kind of the length of one of the folds, but obviously that fabric in that fold goes down and then back up again. And then when it's pulled, it goes down and back up again. And then in the next fold, it goes down and back up again. And then on the bottom, it just goes down. So you have this measurement here that we need to work out for that bottom piece that hangs down from that bottom fold. So we need to work out what that measurement is and then double that measurement for each of these folds that go double up here. Does that make sense? I think that makes sense. Yeah. So that's the maths for the next bit that we're going to do. So to figure that out, what you need to do is, first of all, deduct the length of the header rail from your actual blind. So you need to, if you're using like just a piece of wooden batten, that might be 3 centimeters. So you deduct 3 centimeters from the total length of your blind. If you're using a kit and you've got a header rail like this, you just simply need to measure the length of that header rail, which in this case is 3.5 centimeters, which is annoying. 3.5, I've got to figure out with a half centimeter. So I'm going to deduct 3.5 centimeters from my total blind length, which is 52. I'm going to do all of this on my calculator because I'm doing it live and I'm worried that my brain will fail me. Okay, so I'm left with 49 centimeters. So what you need to do with whatever amount that you're left is divide that by a odd number. So whether you divide it by 3, 5, 7, 9, or maybe even 11 if you've got a really, really long blind. Let me show you again on the handout so that this kind of is clear. Okay, so you've got the total length of the blind minus the drop of the header rail, and then you divide it by, dividing that amount by 3, 5, 7, and 9. And then you can note down in here what all of those amounts are. So for example, divided by 3 for me is 16, just over 16 centimeters. And what we're looking for is an amount that falls between 12 and 17 centimeters. So actually 16 centimeters does. So that would, so dividing by 3 would work for me. So that means that I'd have 3 drops. I could, so if I was to divide it by 5, it's 9.8 centimeters. So actually for me, that's outside of that 12 to 17 centimeter bracket. So because my blind, this blind is quite small, I want to go with this 3 number. So the figure that I need to remember is 16. It's actually 16.3 centimeters. So 16.3 centimeters is going to be the length of that bottom fold for me, that bottom drop here. So I'll measure 16.3 centimeters up from the bottom. That's the bottom fold done. And then you want to double that 16.3. So that would be 32.6. And that's going to be my next fold. And then if I had 5 and it was 16.3, you'd measure 16.3 up again and 16.3 up again, and that would be each of your consecutive folds working your way up the blind. So let me show you on my blind. Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to lay my blind out in front of me. The bottom, I'm going to work up from the bottom. So it was 16.3 centimeters, wasn't it, for me? So I'm going to measure at various intervals, and I'm going to use my fabric pen, again, a washable fabric pen. You could use tailor's chalk if you want to. I wouldn't use pins, just because I think you can get a much more accurate finish if you use tailor's chalk or fabric pens. So I'm going to measure, and again, you can use your steel rule rather than this one. So 16.3 is there. Measure again. There. I'll do another one over here, but you can do more because yours is probably going to be a bit wider. And then I'll get my ruler, and I would always draw a line all the way across for these. Don't rely on those dots. Draw a line all the way across so that you've got a whole line all the way across your blind as a guide. Okay, there we go. Sure you can see that line. I might try and do it again a bit thicker. There we go. Yes, you can see that one. Okay, so that's my first line done. And then I want to get my tape measure and measure. Wow, actually, interestingly, so this is because it's so short, my 16.3 doubled takes me all the way up to the top. But what you would do is you would double it. You'd measure 16.3 up, or whatever your length is for you, up twice. So I've got 16.3 doubled is 32.6, isn't it? So I'm going to measure that. And that does, for me, take us up here. But say you probably have got more folds than this. So again, you would mark it. 32.6. Again. And again. And then you'd draw a line joining up those dots. And then from that point, you'd measure it again, another 32.6. And that gives you your next double drop all the way up. Yes, so that's that. I think I saw a question then, so I'm just going to come to that before I go on. So your blind will be approximately 2 meters, 200 centimeters in length, Maria. Let's just double check. So 200 divided by 13, you say. Yeah, so you can do it by 13. Let's just double check the others. Yeah, 11 is too much, so I'd do 13. Yeah, so you've got quite a few folds. So it'll be 13 for the bottom, and then so hang on, so 200. Sorry, so it's 15.4 is yours. So you've got 15.4 for your bottom piece, and then like 30, 31 for each of the others, which is perfect. Yeah, that would be great. I'd do that. Because that's quite long, I would just, if I was you, so giving the option of using a kit or batten, if it's quite a long fabric is quite heavy, so your fabric for your blind would be, unless it's really quite narrow, maybe for a door or something, your fabric will be quite heavy. So I would probably opt for a Roman blind kit with a header rail like this, over using a batten if you've got lots of fabric and it's going to be really heavy, because it's just a bit more robust and heavy duty. You can actually get heavy duty ones as well. You'll see I've got some recommendations of where you can get Roman blind kits from. I've been emailing them and asking for discounts for you, and none of them have got back to me yet, but if I do find one and anyone is kind enough to offer a discount, I will be sure to let you know as soon as possible. But I have got some recommendations of places I've bought them from in the past. Okay, so we've got lines across. I've got one line across, you'll have several. And then I'll just check if there's another question. Oh yeah, no, that's good. Yes, great. So let me just double check my notes. I just want to make sure that I don't miss anything out for you. Where were we? Here we go. Okay, so next thing we need to do is get the Roman blind tape, which I love. When we started teaching this, we used to faff around with sewing on those little, hand sewing on those little plastic rings, but this tape is so much better. I love it. It just makes life much, much easier. So let me try and show you. Where's that rod gone? Don't know. Get another one. Hang on a moment. Oh, here it is. Okay, so this is the tape. Looks like this. You might not be able to. I think you can see actually if I get the lighting right. Okay, so it just looks like cream tape from the front, but actually down the front of it, it's got this other little tape all the way along, which is looped, stitched onto the front of the tape with little loops like this. And those loops are what you're ultimately going to thread your cord through to pull the blind up and down. And then if I show you the side profile, the rods, so the rods, if you've got a Roman blind kit or just regular doweling, if you want to, from the hardware store, that this is actually kind of a tube, so you can thread those rods through there. So you can see it's kind of slightly open every now and then along the top, and it threads through here. So that part where you with the little loops is directly on top of the rod, and then it has a little lip on one edge, which is the bit that you use to sew the tape onto your blind. So let me just show you. What you need to do is take your tape and at one end, fold it over towards the wrong side by about 1 centimetre, like that. So this is the looped side here, and I'm folding the looped side over by about 1 centimetre. And then I just do a couple of stitches down there to secure that in place, so that when you thread your rod through the tube of the tape, it doesn't come out the other end. So you've got one end which is encased, which is going to hold your rod within it. And then there's a top and a bottom. So you remember I said that there's that edge, that tab edge that you sew along. You need to have that tabbed edge along the bottom, so facing the bottom of your blind. And then the edge which has got the rod in it is the edge which is closest or facing the top of your blind. And then what you need to do when you know that everything is in position is line up the bottom edge of the tape with your line that you have drawn across your blind. So that's why it's really important to draw a line, because it means that it's going to be dead straight then when you put it on. You're not going to have any, just avoiding having any wiggles, and you want this to be really straight so that the mechanism flows really nice and neatly. So again, because there is the chance of things kind of moving around slightly, I'm going to cut the tape so that it's got maybe 3 centimeters extra at the end, just to allow for any discrepancies when I'm sewing. And then that also means that once I've finished sewing, we can save a little bit to fold over to encase the other end as well. So pin that in place, and then you can stitch on really close to that bottom edge of the blind, just very close to that line that you've drawn on your, close to the bottom edge of the tape. And then, so it's also close to the line that you've drawn on your blind. Okay. So, did my pins the wrong way around. That's annoying. It's not the end of the world. It's quite a small blind. Okay, we'll be all right. So again, don't do reverse. Make sure you start your stitching quite close to the beginning and the end, and use the long tail knotting technique to knot and secure your thread at the beginning and at the end. So there we go. Happy with that positioning. I can take the first pin out. And also just remember again to use that technique where you kind of using a bit more force to guide and hold your layers of fabric together so that there's no slippage. If you do have really wide blinds though, I would definitely recommend doing a few tacking stitches just to make sure that you're holding everything in place. Oop. So we have got a little bit of a discrepancy. I don't know if you can see. So it's great that I added extra on because it means that you can adjust it very slightly. I mean, it was probably about 2 millimeters, but you know, it does make a difference. And I'm going to stop just before the end, probably about 0.5 centimeter, and then pull nice long tails of thread. And that is because, oh, what's happened? Don't do that. There we go. Nice long tails of thread. What was I saying? Oh yeah, no, I've done that because then I can tuck the end of the tape around the rod that I'm going to feed through that that piece of tape. Sorry, I don't know what happened to my sewing machine then, but I think we're okay. Okay, so that's done. I'm going to trim it a little bit, but keep it a tiny bit longer in order to fold it over that rod. And then what you would do is you'd repeat that for the next, obviously for the next one. So you'd be exactly the same for the next one up and the next one and the next, however many you're doing, Maria, lots, but that's okay. Okay, so we've done the stitching, so that's all good. So next we need to start adding on, just that's all the sewing done. So it's actually not really that much sewing, really, is it? It's all kind of measuring, and then now it's just kind of assembly, really. So if you are using a kit, it probably is easier because everything comes in one kit, so it's quite nice. Let me show you with the blind, with what I made earlier. So I'm going to take I'll just undo these couple of knots. So with the kit, you get the kind of mechanism for the header rail, you get the tape, you get the rods that go through. So you just type in the width that you need and how many folds. So you'll know that if you've done all the measurements and everything, you'll know how many folds to it. So they know how many of those rods to send you. You get the cord and you get all of the brackets and everything with which to attach it to the wall. So it is really good. I would probably now, generally speaking, use a kit. I think it also probably looks just a bit more professional as well. And then the actual mechanism is like a roller blind, like this. You pull it up and down like that. Okay, I need to be a bit careful here because I've already trimmed those in position, but this is the header rail. So this has got Velcro here attached to it. So you can see the Velcro attaches it like that. So I've got the sticky, sorry, my daughter's friend is using my phone and it's coming off my face. Yeah, the fluffy bit is on my blind already, and the hooky bit is on the header rail of this. So what you need to do is lay your fabric out in front of you like this. and then take your header rail and place it face down so that the two pieces of Velcro are touching each other like this. And you want to line them up really nice and neatly. It's kind of unlike what I'm doing right now, but there we go, you get the idea. So then that is attached to that. It wasn't done very neatly. Well, I'm going to slightly redo it. Hang on now. There we go. That's better. Okay. It's not better. Okay, so it's attached. So the Velcro is attached. And then on the back, you will have the pieces of thread, of cord, sorry, coming out from the back of the top of your header rail like this. They'll be coming out. And the number of pieces of cord will vary according to how wide your blind is. So if you've got a really wide blind, they will automatically send you a blind kit with more than 2 in. So if it's a really wide blind, you might have 3 or maybe even 4 loads of thread of cord coming out. I need to I've done this wrong. Well, I haven't. I just hang on. I want to pull them longer. Here we go. Okay, so you'll have nice long pieces of cord coming down like this. So what you need to do is lay your blind down and then put the cord down the length of the blind and make sure that the distance between the cord and the edge of the blind is consistent all the way down. So it's going down in a nice straight line. And then find, I'm just going to pull them a little bit more. There we go. Okay, done. So find the loop on this tape, which is now poking out. It's protruding because I've put the rod in there. So find the loop on this tape that means that the cord is staying the same distance in from the edge of the blind all of the way down, and then just thread that cord through the loop. It should go through quite easily. I sometimes find it's easier if I fold the cord in half. It seems to go through a little bit more easily like that. So we've got one there. Let's find the next one down, and I know now which loop I want it to go through, so I can just match it up with the one before and put it down through the next one. And then I think I've got another one on this blind because it's a bit longer. Yes, so this is my bottom rod with the cord on it, and I know that because it's at the bottom, and also it's just got the half length beneath it. So on this one, rather than threading through, you can actually tie a little knot through that bottom loop rather than just threading it through. So thread it through first and then tie a little knot, and you want to make sure that the knot is secure, but you also want to be able to undo it again at some point probably. So I'd do like a triple knot. But because it's nylon or polyester cord, it's fairly easy to undo it again. So then do exactly the same on this side. So let me show you again. Okay, so nice straight line. And this here would be the one that we go through. That one there be the one that we go through. So I'm going to fold my cord over again. Thread it through once, and the next one twice, and then tie it with a knot on that bottom one. There we go. And then it's dead easy with a kit because you're pretty much done then. I'll show you. It's very satisfying indeed. There are instructions for how to attach this bracket to the wall. So obviously you can you should do that first, really. So with the bracket, but obviously I don't want to show it to you with the bracket attached on the wall. So you'd have it on your wall and then thread it through. And then you can look. Oh my gosh, so satisfying. So I've got these ends here. So I've not, what you want to do is tuck those over the rods and hand stitch those closed at the end. So that's why you can see those poking out, but otherwise we're all done. And then you just grab your end and you just, this is going to be hard back to front as well, but I'll try. You just pull that down and there we go. Oh my gosh, I love it. Isn't it so satisfying? Honestly, I never tire of it. You might notice that at the beginning, you need to primp your folds a little bit the first few times that you do it. Oh gosh, I've not tied that exactly straight. That's with me doing it upside down. I need to rejig. You can see I've not pulled that one quite as straight. I need to redo that, but that's me. Definitely not the kit. But at the very beginning, when you've got fresh fabric, you might need to leave it to hang for a little bit, but then after, very quickly, you'll find that those folds hang really nice and neatly. But at the beginning, you might just need to primp them a little bit. But that's done otherwise. Now let me just explain to you, if you were not using a kit, how you would do that technique.
Hi, Kate. Hi.
Yeah.
Can I just ask about the kit? Where you threaded the cords through, do you have to trim the cords to a particular length or measure them?
Yeah. Yes, I didn't say that, did I? Sorry. So once you yes, you will find that you have way more cord than what you need. When your kit comes, the cords will be so obviously as you're winding the blind up, the cords are wound around like a bar within that casing. When you get your kit, the cords aren't wound around that at all. They're as long as they will ever be. They're pulled all the way out. So that means that and they're even as well. So that means that when you lay your cords down on the back of your blind, you do them down to the bottom, you'll have loads more than what you need there. They always give you absolutely tons, just I guess for error or whatever. And then once you have threaded them through and you've tied the knot on the bottom, cut them. But when you cut them at the beginning, cut them with quite a lot of extra. So I'd say even like 30 centimeters extra, and then hang your blind, have a little practice. Check that you've tied the knots correctly, unlike me. So doing it back to front, upside down, whatever, trying to show you. So what I'll do now is I'll undo those knots and I'll put it nice and flat and make sure that I've got them even and I'm not tying one of the knots up too high. And then once you're really happy and your blind's been hanging for like a couple of weeks, if you're really happy that you don't need to make any adjustments with those knots, then you can just trim those ends of the cord. But I wouldn't trim them completely flush. I'd always leave like probably 5 centimeters or so, just, you know, just in case. But yeah. Any more questions on the kit or anything else up to where we're up to from anyone? Is it all okay? Okay, I'm going to quickly describe, if you're not using a kit, if you want to kind of make a kit yourself, how to do it. To be honest with you, I think probably it works out. So it's not really cost-saving exercise to do it yourself, unless you've got loads of doweling and battens and stuff at home already. Because actually, in the grand scheme of things, it probably is going to add up to not too dissimilar price. And just for the professional looking finish and ease, it's probably better to get a kit. But so you get doweling to go into your tape. So quite narrow. So just, you can use wooden doweling, or you can sometimes buy like fiberglass poles, but like 0.5 centimeter in diameter maximum, so quite narrow. And then for the top, you'd have just a batten, which is like 2 centimeters by 3 centimeters. And then what you do is you attach the hooky side of the batten, hooky side of the Velcro, to the flat side of the back, the front of the batten. If I'm doing that, I usually use a staple gun, like a heavy duty staple gun, or you can use little tacks if you want to. I wouldn't just glue it. I would definitely do something a bit more long lasting than that. I've always used a staple gun in the past. And then you want to obviously be able to fix your batten either to the wall or to the ceiling. So you'll need to screw some holes through the battens in order to do that, and have the screws and the wall plugs and things like that, the raw plugs and things like that. And then underneath, so with a kit, the cords go directly into this housing. But if you've got a batten, what you need to do is get some little eye screws. So those little tiny screws which have eyes on them. And I say tiny because actually with a small blind, you're okay with a tiny one. But actually, if you've got a larger blind, there's a lot of pressure on those eye screws. So the larger the blind, the more heavy duty and larger you need those eye screws to be. And you need one eye screw to go underneath side of the batten at each point where you've got cord. So you'd have one, if this was a wooden batten, I'd put one eye screw underneath there, one there, and also one on the end here. And then you get your cord, and you, in the same way, you would measure it, you'd open your blind out so it's nice and flat, you'd tie your cord to the bottom and then run your cord up through each of these loops all the way to the top. You'd put, so with this one, you'd go all through the loops up to the top, through that eye screw, through that eye screw, through that eye screw, and then down. And then the next one along would go up through those loops, through that eye screw, through that eye screw, and then down, and so forth, so on and so forth. And then you've got all of your cords coming down here. So when you pull on them, they all pull your blind up through those eye screws and through the loops on the tape to pull your blind up, and then let it go down to lower it down again. That's how you do that. I've written it out with quite detailed instructions on the handouts. So, and I have made loads of blinds in that way, and they're great, but I just now with the kits, I do find it easier. And then also, obviously, you need like a cleat thing to attach to the wall to wrap all of those cords around to make sure that your blind stays in place when it's up or down. That's it. That is it. Right. Questions? Ask me any questions you have. I've got no idea what the time is. Oh, good. Oh my gosh. We are almost slap bang on time. Right. Any questions? Let's see if there's anything in chat. Yeah, you could. So you can do the check when you get a kit. Double check if it tells you to do, because it might be different with different kits with brackets differing and stuff. Whether it might say for you to do it before or after you've put the cords through. I've done both. Which is easier? It is easier to do it before. Actually, it's easier to do it before. So with this one, I've got, I put my brackets on the wall and then I kind of like hook it into the brackets. So you can do it off and then you can hook the brackets, hook this into the brackets, then you can take it out again. So that is probably how most of them work. So it doesn't, so yeah, you'd want to do that actually beforehand. Yeah, and then you can easily take it off again to double if you need to change it. Yeah, hopefully that answers that question. Any other questions from anyone? Is there anything else I haven't told you? Or there is one thing I haven't told you that I didn't cover because I didn't want to, I just wanted to tell you the process from start to finish without getting too confusing. But now you kind of got your head around it, maybe. Some of you might at some point want to make an interlined Roman blind. So that means you have another, you can get two types of interlining. So that means it's extra insulating and it also keeps more, they can be blackout sometimes as well. So you get two types of interlining. You can get kind of a bit like wadding or kind of batting. So it's kind of really fluffy. It's wool quite often or sometimes cotton. It's a really fluffy layer that goes in between the regular lining and the fabric. Or you can get a special type of lining which is just one layer, but which is super thick, and it's got kind of like blackout and interlining in it. So if you've got the interlining type of lining, so you'll see it's quite thick, and it has got kind of an almost 3 layers really. It's kind of white, then black, then white, so it's got like a blackout interlining layer in between. So it's definitely a little bit more fiddly to sew with that, but it does work well. I wouldn't do it for your first one. I'd get one under your belt before you do that, but if you do want to sew with that, you just sew it in exactly the same way. The only difference would be then, because your lining is quite a lot thicker than your fabric, whereas with most fabrics, you remember when you do the very first 2 side seams and you fold the seam allowances in to face the center. If you're using that really thick interlining lining, you would fold the hems out towards the edges instead, because you wouldn't want to have multiple layers of that lining, because it would just be like really thick and annoying and kind of clumpy. The other way is to use like batting, like another layer that you slot in between. So you'd need to cut your piece of batting to exactly the finished width, the finished size, exact finished size of your finished blind. Once you've done that first step, sewing those 2 side hems, you've basically got a tube, and you can then slot the interlining into that tube, make sure it's super nice and flat. I would then definitely do some tacking stitches all the way along, just at maybe 2 or 3 intervals down, to hold all of those layers in place, and then carry on. But what you want to make sure is that the bottom piece of the interlining sits at the point which is the bottom of your blind. So when you do that very first hem, which is folding up, well, the bottom hem folding up by 2 centimeters, then 4 centimeters along the bottom of your blind, you would want your the bottom of your interlining to sit at that point. You don't want to fold your interlining up, because again, way too much bulk, it's just unnecessary, wouldn't look so nice. I think that's the only other thing I thought might be useful to you that I've not covered. However, I'm going to download the video, the recording this evening. It might be that I send it through tomorrow morning. I'll see what's going on with the children inside, but I'll send it through to you as soon as I possibly can, because I know sometimes you're just like, oh, I want to get started with my sewing. So I'll send it through to you certainly tomorrow morning at the latest, and I'll send it to you with the handbook as well, and any other recommendations I can think of. If you have any other questions, please just email me and I'll be delighted to answer them for you. So don't worry, if you start sewing, you're like, oh golly, I'm a bit stuck, I don't know what I'm doing, whatever, just ask and I'll get back to you. Otherwise, that's it. Thank you so much. I hope it's been useful, and please share your pictures with me of your blinds when they're done. I would love to see them. But thank you, it's been lovely. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Lots of love. Bye-bye.